In one of our live discussions that we have pretty much nightly on weekdays, we had a discussion last week on Africa and the countries in Africa, the nations in Africa, and where would they have been sans colonialism? If the white man didn't get to Africa, at least sub-Saharan Africa, how would the outlook have been at least differently from what is going on now? And who knows? Nobody knows for sure, but my argument is that when you look at the history of Africa, not just the far history, the modern history, what is happening in current times, you see there are lots of problems that Africa faces that have very little, if anything, to do with foreign influence. There are problems inside of Africa, amongst the African countries, amongst the tribes, that make some of these things a bit more difficult. And over the weekend here, I was looking at some news. I was following a story, very interesting, about Rwanda. And the last thing I really had in my mind as major news out of Rwanda was the genocide in 1994, somewhere around there, where the Hutus and the Tutsis, who originally were pretty much the same ethnic group and drifted genetically slightly apart but lived in the same area over a long period of time, there was a genocide where the Hutus predominantly murdered a whole lot of Tutsis, and there was a war and all of that, and a lot of the country was ravaged and the country is trying to catch back itself. All right. Then next thing I'm seeing occasionally is a visit Rwanda on t-shirts in sporting games, and nothing key in the news until I really followed this story a bit. And the story is interesting. It's a tale of how to make your strength felt in geopolitics. It's a tale of finessing. If you're familiar with that word, finessing the geopolitical establishment, because Rwanda has some interest in their neighbor, the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Now, DRC is that central area in Africa where it's huge. It's a huge country in Central Africa, and there are many mineral resources there. Very rich in resources. Hard to deal with, very jungled, forested, but nonetheless very wealthy nonetheless. And Rwanda, on the eastern side of Africa, is bordering on there. Now, some years ago, there was an attack that Rwanda did on DRC, but it didn't turn out too good in Rwanda's favor, because unfortunately for Rwanda, because of the genocide that happened there, the war in the 90s, a lot of Rwanda was ravaged, and they survived and still survive to this day on a lot of foreign aid. Foreign aid is a key part of how they get money to live. Simple as that. Let's look at the foreign aid side of the story first. Then we jump into some of the more juicy parts, as some might call it. All right. So, foreign aid to Rwanda. Rwanda is a small, hilly, landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa with around 14 million people. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi destroyed many essential government buildings and services, completely devastating the country. The international community largely regards the Rwandan government as an effective development partner. They see the country as one that employs international aid efficiently to implement its rebuilding and development strategies. Rwanda's reputation stems from the government's strong capacity to implement policies with minimal corruption. This ensures no aid or natural resources are misused or wasted. Rwanda has a good history of aid going directly towards policies that benefit the population and foster sustainable development. Foreign aid to Rwanda showcases encouraging results. Major donors to Rwanda, the major foreign country donors to Rwanda are the US, Germany, France, and Japan. As of 2021, Rwanda's biggest donor was the US, donating $174 million. In total, in 2021, Rwanda received $1.3 billion in foreign aid. The country receives some of the largest aid per capita compared to its regional neighbors. In 2021, Rwanda received $98, that's US, in aid per capita. That's per person. greater than $55 for Uganda, $37 for the DRC, and $47 for Burundi during the same year. So even right in the circle, in their neighborhood right there around Rwanda, some of these countries maybe right now they are in a poorer situation than Rwanda. Nonetheless, because of their political moves, because of how they represent themselves, the government of Rwanda represents itself, they seem as a sure investment. So for a long time now, they've been receiving a lot of aid. Aid is a big part of what they do. It is a big part of how they survive. However, back in the early 2010s, they attempted to make a move on their neighbor. Foreign aid to Rwanda has come under more scrutiny lately as international donors have expressed concern over the country's role in supporting human rights abuses and conflict in the DRC. Rwanda's reported involvement in the current conflict in DRC culminated in the US suspending aid in 2012. Look at that article. Rwanda military aid cut by US over DR Congo M23 rebels. This is from 22nd July 2012. Now, just take a look at this picture here. Looking at the M23 rebels funded by the Rwandans out there in DRC. If you look at this picture right now, this is the picture that they had for them back in 2012. Keep in mind this picture. Keep a nice mental image of this because we're going to see a more modern picture just now. The US has cut military aid to Rwanda following accusations it is backing rebels in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. The US State Department says the funding $200,000 will be reallocated to other countries. Rwanda has rejected reports by the UN and rights groups that it is supporting the rebels, including the M23 movement in eastern DR Congo. As a result of the fighting, 200,000 people have fled their homes. So Rwanda has some interest there in Eastern DRC. Eastern DRC has been plagued by fighting since 1994. That year may be significant if you remember, because that's the year of the Rwandan genocide, when more than 1 million ethnic Hutus crossed the border into DR Congo following the Rwandan genocide, in which some 800,000 people, mostly Tutsis, died. Rwanda has twice invaded its much larger neighbor, saying it was trying to take action against Hutu rebels based in DR Congo. Uganda also sent troops into DR Congo during the 1997 to 2003 conflict. Now, this sounds kind of familiar to something else going on right now in geopolitics. This sounds very similar to what is going on with Mr. Vladimir Putin out there in Russia and next to Ukraine. The ostensible reason for the Russian action in Ukraine is because there are Russian ethnic groups, Russian ethnic people living in that eastern side of Ukraine. And Russia said that they were trying to protect their ethnic people from abuse by the Ukrainians. Much similar to what is allegedly going on in Eastern DRC there. So the Rwandans are saying that these Hutus that crossed over from Rwanda into Eastern Congo are causing difficulty among Tutsi ethnic members in that region, and they are also causing some friction on the border. So that's why Rwanda had to do this action. So they did. Unfortunately for them, in 2012, they were very reliant on foreign aid. And foreign aid, although it helps, it directs. It means that whatever you want to do is dependent on the people who are paying you. He who pays the piper calls the tune, the saying goes. So if you are currently needing foreign aid, and then you are doing things that are against what the people who are from foreign and aiding you want, They could just pull the aid, and then the action has to stop. And the action did stop. So it kind of cast some doubt on Rwanda, saying they had nothing to do with the M23 rebels, because after the foreign aid was pulled, Rwanda, who had nothing to do with the M23 rebels, pulled back their support, and the rebels died down. The whole action seemed like it disappeared. Nothing for years, nothing for a decade. But in that decade, Rwanda didn't just sit there and keep collecting foreign aid and just, fattening their pockets with what they could. No. Rwanda looked at the world and saw how this whole geopolitical thing runs. And they had some ideas. Between the last 10 years, Rwanda has made themselves much more key in geopolitical decisions. And because of that, now that they have restarted that activity in Eastern Congo, the reactions are not, and to some extent cannot, be the same. The Rwandan Defense Force operations abroad signal a shift in Rwanda's regional standing. Amidst mounting criticism against the failures of United Nations peacekeeping and Western military involvement, an increasing number of African governments across the continent have demanded withdrawal of former military partners. These emerging security gaps have been increasingly filled by new armed actors and forms of cooperation, including private military companies, local self-defense groups, and regional partners. Having long contributed to multilateral peacekeeping missions, Rwanda has positioned itself as an alternative security partner, sending bilateral missions across the continent. The Rwanda Defense Force began engaging in further bilateral operations in late 2020, when RDF soldiers and special forces deployed to the Central African Republic to counter a rebel offensive. That engagement expanded in 2021, when Rwanda deployed forces to Mozambique in the face of the rising Islamist insurgency in northern Cabo Delgado province. While Rwanda has increased involvement in regional security alongside host governments, since 2022, the bulk of its regional interventionism has shifted towards supporting M23. Now, you can look here at a nice map of Rwanda's interventions in Africa from February of 2005 to June of 2024. We have, starting from West Africa, Northwest Africa, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Mali, Chad, Sudan, more than once in Sudan, multiple times, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Mozambique. These guys are all about the place. They are the peacekeeping force. It's interesting that we didn't ask Rwanda to come over and see about Haiti when they were looking for peacekeepers for Haiti. It's interesting Rwanda's name didn't come up. They went with Kenya. But Rwanda has been everywhere. And when you are the peacekeeping force in multiple areas, you are seen as the stabilizer. And you cannot get rid of a stabilizer that easy. Rwanda's military support to other countries is part of its strategy to boost its reputation. Rwanda is one of Africa's geographically smallest countries. However, its foreign policy, whose hallmark is military diplomacy, has attracted international attention. Some African regional players like South Africa and Kenya have tried to adopt forms of military diplomacy. However, their attempts have often been met with suspicion by other African countries. Rwanda, on the other hand, has become one of the world's top contributors of peacekeepers. The country has about 6,000 peacekeepers serving in UN missions. This is the fourth highest figure globally. That's a very interesting thing. And what that also does is it gives a lot of experience to your military. So the Rwandan military, the Rwandan Defense Force, some of them serving since genocide days in the early 90s, and then being deployed all around Africa on peacekeeping missions, they would have seen action way more than probably an average defense force. So you have an experienced, hardened military, and you also get the benefit of boosting how you look to the foreign observers. United Nations peacekeeping, Rwanda's remarkable contribution to peace in the CAR recognized. The Republic of Rwanda, its small size notwithstanding, is a giant of peacekeeping. The Central African country certainly pulls its weight when it comes to global UN peacekeeping operations. Reason for MINUSCA to hold a medal parade today in Bangui for members of the Rwandan military contingent for their service to peacekeeping in the Central African Republic. One of the founding members of the United Nations and currently ranking third among top troop contributing countries, Rwanda promptly answered the UN call for peacekeeping in the Central African Republic, sending military and police contingent to MINUSCA right from the mission's inception. You represent a noticeable and remarkable commitment of the Republic of Rwanda to global peace and stabilization, stated the special representative of the Secretary General and mission head Mancur NDA. During the ceremony, he noted that no fewer than 6,650 daughters and sons of Rwanda had put their skills and professionalism to service, sometimes at the risk of their lives, in 14 peacekeeping mission operations and missions in 4 countries since March 2005. So now Rwanda finds themselves in a nice position, a position of adulation. You know, they have a military all around Africa, and in fact other parts, where they help to keep the peace. And in that case, when you have to do things as pertaining to Rwanda, now you have to deal with them a little different, because you don't want to go and anger the people that are keeping peace in several different nations throughout Africa. You go and anger these people, they pull back their peacekeeping forces, and you end up with war all around these nations. Not a good idea. So now you have to be careful how you deal with them. But it's not just in the peacekeeping military side. They've been doing it in multiple areas. Rwanda's sports fever, a pillar of development or sport washing. Kigali sponsors foreign soccer clubs, organizes the African NBA playoffs, and wants to host a Formula One Grand Prix. Paul Kagame's government sells its commitment to sport as a path to progress. Human rights organizations, however, maintain that the aim is to whitewash the regime's abuses. There's a link between Arsenal, Paris Saint-Germain, and Bayern Munich. 3 of the world's biggest soccer teams, they all have sponsorship deals with the Rwandan government to promote the small African country as a tourist destination. On players' shirts and advertising hoardings, the Visit Rwanda logo is highly visible in European stadiums. The same slogan has been appearing everywhere for 4 years at the Basketball Africa League playoffs and NBA franchise, which have been held in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, since 2021. Kigali will host the Road Cycling World Championship next year, and in the medium term aspires to stage a much more ambitious event. If negotiations are successful, the first Formula One Grand Prix to take place on African soil since the South African Grand Prix was held in 1993. According to the government of President Paul Kagame, in power in Rwanda since 2000, you know, when you hear Republic of Rwanda, you know, your assumptions about their democratic status could be false. This sporting gold rush is the result of a meticulous plan to encourage investment and attract visitors. The official version speaks of a strategic bet to consolidate the country as an African power in global sport, of an axis of development, like the emphasis on technology, another pillar of Rwandan prosperity in the long term, will bring wealth and well-being to citizens. For Human Rights Watch and other international human rights organizations, however, it is a cosmetic operation using the glamour of high-level competition to cover up the authoritarian miseries of the regime. But nonetheless, you are a sponsor on several large and prominent sporting clubs. So again, if they want to tackle you, how they tackle you has to be, softened, because there are salaries in Europe that now depend on you. Rwanda was learning. Rwanda sought to learn. They sought to learn. And again, it wasn't just military peacekeeping. It wasn't just these sports teams and the sports sponsorships and the sporting events. UK Parliament approves controversial Rwanda deportation bill. Controversial UK government plans for deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda cleared their final hurdle on Monday after a marathon tussle between the upper and lower chambers of Parliament lasting late into the night. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says deportation flights will begin in July. This was an article from just last year. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his ruling Conservatives have been seeking to push through legislation that will compel judges to regard the East African nation as a safe third country. They also want to give decision makers on asylum applications the power to disregard sections of international and domestic human rights laws to get around the UK Supreme Court ruling that sending migrants on a one-way ticket to Kigali was illegal. Now, that's British bacchanal on their side, and eventually it fell through, but it didn't fall through on the Rwandan side. So Rwanda positioning themselves ever more as a willing and able and capable European ally for whatever interests you may have. Even if some people may frown upon them, that's no problem. We will take care of it. We are your friends, Rwanda said. And it's smart. Part of that, as they highlighted there, with the President Paul Kagame being in control for the better part of 3 decades, that's one of the benefits of that authoritarian rule. The rule where someone doesn't have to worry about elections coming up. They could make very long-term plans. I mean, if indeed, as it seems like to me, this was a long-term strategy session, that, all right, we tried in 2012, it didn't work because we were too dependent. So we're going to change some things in the next decade and then we're going to hit back again. This is something that couldn't be done, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2012 in Trinidad and Tobago, there was the People's Partnership. If they tried to do something, then they were voted out in 2015. The next group didn't have the same plan, so they would have pulled the country in another direction. So let's say the People's Partnership came back and wanted to do an invasion again, they wouldn't have had the run-up necessary. These are the benefits of for countries even like China, where they could do 40, 50, 60, 100-year plans, because the general idea, the general expectation is it's going to be the same group of people in charge. So you can do long-term planning like that. And let's look at where this is now, right now, where this has reached. This was the first piece I saw in looking at this news and catching up on this news. An interview with the Rwandan president on CNN. Rwanda's president says he doesn't know. He doesn't know if his country's troops are in DRC. How does one not know? How does one not know? I am a bit confused on that, President Kagame. How you mean you don't know? You have a small country and you don't know if your troops are over by your neighbor. Rwanda's president Paul Kagame has told CNN he doesn't know if his country's troops are in the east of the Democratic Republic of DRC, where fighting between the M23 armed group and Congolese soldiers has killed more than 900 people and injured thousands in recent days. Much of the international community believes that Rwanda backs the M23 rebels, who claimed to capture the city of Goma in eastern Congo last week. UN experts believe that an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 Rwandan soldiers are supervising and supporting M23 fighters in the east of the DRC, outnumbering the rebel group's forces in the country. In an exclusive interview at CNN on Monday, Kagame was asked if there were any Rwandan troops inside the DRC. I don't know, Kagame said. Despite the fact that he is the commander-in-chief of the Rwandan Defense Force. There are many things I don't know, but if you want to ask me, is there a problem in the Congo that concerns Rwanda, and that Rwanda would do anything to protect itself, I'll say 100%, he said. That sounds like a Putin answer. That nearly sounds like an answer Mr. Vladimir Putin could have given. Really and truly. At least 900 bodies have been recovered from the streets of Goma since violence erupted. According to the United Nations' latest figures, as of 31st January, at least 900 bodies have been recovered from the streets, said the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in a report Monday citing the World Health Organization. Pressure mounts on Rwanda as M23 sees Bukavu. The DR Congo insists on a military solution in the fight against the Rwandan-backed M23 rebels. Analysts say the fall of Bukavu could complicate matters. Now look at this picture we have pulled up here. Look at M23 10 years later. Look at the guys. Look at the guys. I mean, let's go back. Go back. Watch them here. 2012. Now, look at them here, 2025. Don't they look like they have modernized quite a bit? In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the fighting between the rebel coalition-led M23 and the Congolese army continues unabated. The militias are gaining more and more territory in the South Kivu province and captured the provincial capital of Bukavu on Sunday. So yeah, they're moving. But the pullback from Rwanda is not the same as 2012. Calls for Arsenal, PSG and Bayern urged to end Visit Rwanda deals. The Democratic Republic of Congo has called on Arsenal, Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain to end their blood-stained sponsorship deals with Visit Rwanda amid a worsening humanitarian crisis in the country. A group of UN experts maintains the Rwandan army is in de facto control of M23 operations. They are Congo's Foreign Minister Therese Kayakwamba Wagner has written to the owners of Arsenal and PSG and Bayern President Herbert Heiner to question the morality of the deals. She highlighted how Visit Rwanda sponsorship could be funded by illicit mining of blood minerals in the occupied parts of DR Congo before being transported across the border and exported from Rwanda. I can't remember what's the name of these minerals, man. Some minerals important, you know, there are lots of these rare earth minerals that are very important as you get into electronics manufacturing, and as we push more of that in, I think coltan is one of them, coltan, and a lot of it is found in the Congo. What would you know? As soon as M23 began their activity and taking over areas of the Congo, Rwanda started exporting these minerals. These minerals that up until recently Rwanda had none of. So it seems like Rwanda magically began finding some of the same minerals that exist in Eastern Congo. Strange. Very strange. And now, look, if you look at this again, geopolitically, if you have a chaotic, poor, badly managed Congo that you could attempt to make deals with to get these minerals, Or you have the very well-run, militant even, well-disciplined Rwanda. Who would foreign companies much rather make deals with? Very likely. And many of these foreign companies, since time immemorial, since resources have begun flowing out of Africa, many of these companies don't really have much scruples about how or where they came from. Once they're good and once they're coming at the right price. And Rwanda seems to know this. So you combine resource output, funding sports, doing sports, and military help all over. The pulling away from Rwanda isn't what it was in 2012. In a letter to Arsenal, she stated that Rwanda's culpability for the ongoing conflict has become incontrovertible. It is time Arsenal ended its blood-stained sponsorship deals with this oppressor nation. If not for your own consciences, then the clubs should do it for the victims of Rwandan aggression, she wrote. It's interesting. And this goes back to what I started talking about, where when you look at oppressor and oppressed narratives, it's not as simple as the Europeans are the oppressors and all of the Africans were the oppressed, unfortunately. No, that's not so. And this nation has put themselves in a stronger position. And people in a stronger position now, they do what they do. Kagame to UK's Lamy. Rwanda's security concerns must be recognized in DRC conflict. The presidency said Kagame and Lamy discussed bilateral relations and the need for a lasting solution to the situation in DRC, rooted in the reality on the ground. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has told British Foreign Secretary David Lammy that any resolution to the ongoing crisis in eastern DRC must take into account Rwanda's security concerns as diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the conflict intensify. Now, this in and of itself is different from 2012, where a foreign secretary has to go over to Rwanda and discuss this nearly as equals, where you can't tell us stop doing what we're doing in eastern DRC just like that, because you can't make us do it. Or, well, if not can't, you don't want to. So now, Rwanda has, as it were, proverbially, a seat at the table. So it's not that the table discusses what has to happen and then bellows downward towards Rwanda what they must do in order to follow the rules. No, Rwanda now has a seat. So when you want Rwanda to do something, you come to the table, sit amongst them, and discuss it. I just find this story interesting. Very interesting. How you see the movement of a country, the movement of a nation, small, insignificant seeming, but making power moves. Making power moves as a small nation, and the result, you can actually see a change in how global powers interact with them. The aid isn't drying up, certainly not like it did in 2012. Arsenal, PSG, Bayern, they aren't running away from Rwanda. I think President Kagame sat back and looked at the world that we lived in and understood that, okay, Apple has slavery reportedly, has slave labor building their phones, but nobody really harasses them because they are key enough players. I wonder if more countries, even in Africa, because you look at many of these African nations, they have a lot of power if they could become stable enough. If only the tribes would not battle each other for control for long enough. And I understand that the internal battles that many of the tribes have are funded and fueled by outside powers. That's true. But still, if they could remain stable for long enough to make some global power plays, there would be some effect. At least I believe so. What do you think? You tell me what you think. That's all I have for now. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, bye.